Hey guys, so today we're going to be doing a JZS171 engine harness that is for a plug and play into a JZX100 that originally had a 1JZ-GE VVT-i. So let's get into it. Right guys, as I said, this harness is for a 1JZ-GTE VVT-i from a JZS171 Crown. It is going into a JZX100 that originally had a 1JZ-GE VVT-i, and this customer is using a manual gearbox, specifically an R154. Okay, so as you can see, this harness is completely brand new and it's our modular design. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to go through and show you the photos of all the sub harnesses and the build process so you can see exactly what goes into making one of these. So let's do that now. Right, there you go. So you can see the whole build process. Everything's nice, twisted, all covered in heat shrink, and I've got all the modular harnesses there, which we're going to go through now. So what we're going to be doing today is, first of all, we're going to go through the layout of the harness. So we're going to go through exactly where everything plugs into. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do the testing based with the ignition on and with the engine running. Sorry, both with the ignition on and the engine running. So two different sections there. Okay. So first thing I want to come across is obviously this is going to be plug and play into a JZX100, not an IS200, okay? So again, I'm just using this particular one because on a 1JZ-GE VVT-i on a JZX100, even from 96 to 98, which this particular one was, it does have the ability to have an OBD2 plug on it. So for me, it was just easier to wire it up to here. So I sort of interfaced with the IS200 there to take the wires that would be coming from the JZX100. And obviously then I can access the OBD2 connector on the other side as well. So again, it's not going into an IS200, but I'm just using the IS200 to do the testing of the harness. Okay, so as with the JZX100, you know it goes inside the vehicle. So what we're going to do first of all is let's start down here by the ECU and we'll work our way around over there. Okay, so obviously this is the JZS171 ECU. It's got the 5 ECU plugs over there. They're all unique. They can't be plugged into the wrong place, so you don't have to worry about that. You just plug those straight in over there. Okay, now obviously on the JZX100 you have these two plugs, the 28 and the 16. They are left behind in the vehicle, so again this needs to interface with those ones to make it a plug and play setup. Okay, now over here you're going to see what I call the expansion plug, and basically that is because this harness is a bit of a weird one. The guy was left basically with these three connectors, this one, the blue one, and the white one. He had no original harness that we could work from the JZX100 side. And so I, after much digging and deliberation and going through tons of diagrams, as far as I can tell, there should have been another plug that was here by the ECU. And so I've basically taken those wires to this DTM connector, because I'm pretty sure that obviously we're going to have to take some things like TAC is in there, the speed sensor wires for the gearbox are in there. Originally his car is probably an auto, so again, it's probably not going to need that, but yeah, I've just got it there all just in case. We've also got the rev counter or tacho signal coming from the igniter, as well as the JZS171 ECU, because obviously in the JZX100, the rev counter signal actually came from the igniter and not from the ECU, but I've given him both options there so he can use that. And obviously I've got coolant temperature and oil. Now they are also in these plugs over here, but there was a bit of a question mark in relation to that, because again, I didn't have the original harness to confirm everything 110%. After going through the diagrams, I could find some of those wires in there, but to be on the safe side, I have taken them to there just in case we need to take them over to the dash for things like the coolant temperature and the oil light. Okay. Right, so that is that over there. You've got your 5 plugs over there. We've got a little patch harness over there, and we've got our expansion / dash plug, if you want to call it that, because it's got all the stuff that would normally go to the dash. Right, because it is originally an auto ECU, we have our ATEMU device over there, so that is wired into the JZS171 ECU. That's going to fool the ECU into thinking the automatic gearbox is still there and going to keep everything working as it should. Okay, and neatly tucked away over here, which hopefully I can get to here. Now, the reason I've put an accelerator pedal position sensor connector in here is because we've done it in a modular design. Do remember that obviously we want to make sure that we build in as much future proofing and functionality as we can, okay? So that obviously then if the customer ever wanted to change over to an aftermarket ECU, we can simply take one of these headers, which I have tons of, and we can then wire it directly to an aftermarket ECU. And as we go through the harness, you're going to see there's a whole bunch of extra things that I've added in that are, for the moment, obviously just blanked off, but obviously if you wanted to use them with an aftermarket ECU, they're already there. So all we'd have to do is build a little sub harness, and we'll go through all of those as we go through the harness over there. But that's one of them. So if you ever wanted to change to like a Bosch drive-by-wire throttle, this could then be connected to an actual accelerator pedal that sits inside the vehicle. And obviously you could change the throttle over to a Bosch drive-by-wire throttle, because again, we do have the throttle on a separate sub harness. Obviously the JZS171 is drive-by-wire already, so everything is in there for drive-by-wire. We also put an intake air temperature sensor wire in there as an extra. So obviously if you went aftermarket ECU and you had the Bosch drive-by-wire throttle coming down here, you could put the IoT sensor in here just before it hits the throttle over there, okay? But there's some other stuff, we're gonna go through all of that as we go through there, okay? Right, so moving on from there, there's then 3 body plugs over there, which should just plug directly into the vehicle. And again, obviously went through all the diagrams, so it should all be 100% correct on that one. And moving along from there, you'll see that this then joins into the harness over there, okay? And moving along there, you'll see we then have our grommet. So again, we didn't have the original grommet from the 1JZ-GE VVT-i, but this is pretty close in terms of size. So hopefully this one will be okay. If not, we can make a little metal. He can make a little metal plate. And obviously that'll then keep this in place and nice and waterproof. We've then obviously used some epoxy line heat shrink on there to keep the water from the engine bay, because now here will be inside the engine bay out. And the first things that pop out here is going to be our 3 resistors for the ECU to mimic the solenoid SLU, SLN, and SLT of the automatic transmission. Now, the reason I don't put these inside the vehicle is these get incredibly hot, so I keep them out into the engine bay. Normally I advise people to take a little, if you can, take a little bit of aluminium plate, and then obviously you can rivet these to there. These do obviously have heat sinks on them, but if you could put them onto aluminium plate, it does 2 things. One, it keeps them nice and neat. It's nice and easy to mount that aluminium plate. And obviously then it stays in the engine bay where it can get airflow, and it's not going to do any damage and melt any wires and so on. Whereas if you guys are trying to put it inside the vehicle, you got to be super careful, because they get so hot they could, you know, burn carpets, they could melt wires and so on and so forth. Okay, so if these do get super hot, don't stress. They are supposed to do that, but yeah, that's why they are on the outside of the engine. Okay. Moving along from there, now obviously this grommet would be on this side over here. But moving along from there, we then have 3 breakouts over here. The first one is for a wideband oxygen sensor. So again, this is going to be for an aftermarket ECU. So you can see for the moment, we have just blanked this up and put blanking pins in there to keep water out of there. So again, in this case, because using standard ECU, is not going to be using that. But if he ever was to upgrade and say go with like an ECU Master Black or a Link Fury that had built-in wideband sensor control, we can take all of those wires to aftermarket ECU. and make a little sub harness that plugs into here and goes to a Bosch LSU 4.9 wideband sensor. Okay. Moving along from there, we then have injector. So obviously everything is labeled for you guys, so it's really, really easy to sort out. But this is the injector harness, and this goes along here and plugs injector 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Now, obviously, these are the original injectors from the customer's JZS171 harness, so we could salvage those. So nicely, what Toyota have done is, obviously, I've labeled everything, so it's kind of irrelevant, but I've kept the same thing. So they go gray, brown, and then if you can see there, that's going to be gray, and number 6 is going to be brown. Okay, again, I've labeled them 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on there, so you can see there injector 4. So again, you don't have to worry about that, they are labeled, but I kept the color code. That's what Toyota did over there. Okay, and then lastly, for this section, we have ignition. Now, obviously, this is going to be using a standard JZS171 setup, which is going to be made up of our 3 coils over there. It's a wasted spark system, so you have a coil directly over a spark plug, and then it moves over to the next one. Okay, now again, these are labeled, but you must be aware of how the system works. So again, if you have a look over here, I think this is going to be labeled as ignition 1. Okay, kind of doesn't make sense because it's on 6, but if you follow the wire from there, it goes all the way to the front to cylinder 1. So that is actually 1 because it does 1 and 6. This is actually 2 because it does 2 and 5. So you can see the wire running along there. And this is actually 3 because it does 3 and 4. Okay. So again, 1, 2, and 3. So it's not like 1, 2, 3. So again, but the way that the harness works, you can't really plug them in the wrong place, because if you plug that one there, then that one's not going to reach there. If you plug this one in there, then obviously everything else is going to be pulled massively forward. So again, it kind of works the way the harness is laid out. You can't really get it wrong, but just be aware of that. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Now, coming off this harness as well, we then have the igniter, which hopefully you can see down there. Now in this case, I've just screwed it onto the firewall. It does need a ground, obviously, to go in there. So again, when the engine's in your car, it's way down here, down there. So you can just find there. Anywhere on the firewall there, you can just screw that down over there. And again, this whole system is set up so that basically inside here, I already have added ignition wires for 4, 5, and 6, okay? They go to unused pins on the ECU. So I've just put them in there so that basically we have them to access. Again, if you want to go with an aftermarket ECU, we can then change this to run Yaris coils, R35 coils, Audi coils, whatever you wanted to. All the wiring is already built in there for you guys, because obviously these are considered twisted harnesses. There's no going in and adding stuff later on. So we add in everything now, so that if you guys want to change over later, you can do. So again, if you did that, you just unplug this, we'd build your harness for your 6 individual coils, throw it on there when we build a patch harness for the aftermarket ECU. Okay, moving along from there, we then have a breakout over here, and it's 3 little sections over there. We have 2 ground straps. Now obviously on a 1JZ-GTE VVT-i, there's a smooth surface here. That's where your ground straps go. So there should be 2 bolt holes there, because that's how the original JZS171 had 2 earthing points there. So again, we're mimicking that with 2 earthing points there. Tucked away in there, we then have our cam sensor. So again, it is all labeled for you there, so that plugs directly into there. No dramas, nothing too complicated there. Okay, moving along from there, we then have a big breakout over here, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes out there. So let's dive in and go down and see exactly what's going on. But first of all, because it is right here, we do have our throttle plug. Okay, and again, in this case, it is set up for a JZS171. So we have our drive-by-wire motor. We have our accelerator pedal position sensor, and that obviously comes off at the very beginning, because the accelerator position sensor is going to be on the inside over here. And then lastly, we have our TPS plug, which is that one over there. Let's get that to focus there. Okay, so that is the throttle over there. That's all that's required for the JZS171. But again, as I said, I've got everything in there. I've even got an intake air temperature sensor wire going there that's not used, obviously, in this particular case. But again, that's for if you guys want to change to aftermarket ECUs, and so we can get all of that set up for you over there. Okay, let's pop down over here, and you'll see our first one here is going to be PSP, which stands for power steering pressure switch, or not pressure sensor. Okay, now in this case, I obviously don't have power steering lines on here, so I'm using a IS200 map sensor. Now, luckily, Toyota used the same connector for any type of pressure sensor. So whether it be map or whether it be a pressure sensor on a power steering line, it's all the same connector. So if you're not transferring the lines over and maintaining that power steering pressure sensor, you do need to do something like this. Reason being is that you will get an error code, and it'll cause the check engine light to come on if this is not connected. Okay. And again, if you want to go aftermarket ECU, technically it's a 0 to 5 volt sensor. So you can put whatever you want in there, basically. Okay, it's not on a DTM connector, but it is like a last resort because you'll see we've pretty much covered everything else as we go through here. One we can see straight in front of us here is oil. Again, 6-pin DTM connector. Obviously, at the moment, it's only going to an oil pressure switch, which is all you'll have and need on your JZS171. But again, we've built into that plug the ability to have oil pressure and temperature as well. So again, if you go aftermarket ECU, we can just make another sub harness and we can fit an oil pressure, temp and temp sensor like the Bosch one. We can fit the oil pressure switch and pressure and temperature as well. So again, really useful if you want to keep all of those going. You can usually buy a T-piece that goes in there, fit the standard BSP switch in there, and then have like a 1/8 NPT popping out, or M10x1 if they do one of those, and you can put a Bosch sensor in there. Okay. Next up, you can see here is fuel. Okay, little 3-pin DTM connector. Again, that is going to be for fuel pressure. So again, it is blocked off on this particular harness because again, he cannot use that. It is going to unused pins on the ECU. So again, it can't be connected to anything at the moment. But again, if he goes aftermarket ECU, we can add a fuel pressure sensor on there. Really straightforward. Next up is K&K, which stands for knock. And hopefully I can show you down here. But there's one knock sensor and there's the other one. So that's knock 1 and that is knock 2, okay? So again, just be sure that you get them correct on that one because obviously the ECU's hoping that knock 1 is doing cylinder 1, 2, 3 and knock 2 is doing cylinder 4, 5, 6, okay? But again, everything is labeled. So it does have K&K1 for knock 1 for the front one and K&K2 knock 2 for the front one over there, okay? Now, onto some things that are specific for the JZS171 that wouldn't normally be used on aftermarket ECU is FPU or fuel pressure up. So there'll be a little solenoid on the inlet manifold here, and PRG or purge. Again, a little vacuum solenoid valve that's going to go over to the fuel tank, and obviously that's going to work those two particular things. So again, the plugs are different. So you can see that this one, the little keyway is on this side, and this one, the little keyway is on that side. So you can't get them wrong, so don't stress about that. Again, really straightforward. They'll only go into one spot, okay? Now then, looking down over here, we have our last little sort of section that's going to go over there. It pops down over here and it splits off here where it goes to the starter solenoid. So hopefully you probably can't see it because it's underneath there. But anyway, there's your starter solenoid plug, again labeled STA, so really nice and simple and straightforward. And breaking off from there, we then have this 4-pin DTM connector here, and this is going to be gearbox. Okay, again, we separate these because we don't know what you guys are going to do in the future. He's got R154 now, maybe he wants to go BMW gearbox, maybe he wants to go CD009. Whatever you want to do, that's why we put it on a sub harness. If you ever change a gearbox, you can just give us a call, tell us what you got, and then we can make a harness that matches that, and we can keep your reverse light if you go BMW, because obviously it doesn't have a speed sensor. Same with the CD009, we'll just basically put a reverse switch in. It'll plug directly into there. But in this case, he's using an R154, so we have put on there a reverse switch. Again, all nicely labeled for you, reverse, and this is for the speed sensor. Okay. Right, so again, everything is coming into the vehicle so we can use it if we need to, but as per usual with Toyota, a lot of times if they weren't manual originally, the speed is coming from somewhere else, usually basically from the ABS system, but on some of these Japanese models, they do a weird thing where it was the actual speed sensor on the back of the automatic gearbox. But there's only a few of those that I've come across before. But anyway, I've taken all the speed wires to the dash plug over there. So you'll have them inside the vehicle. So worst case scenario, we can just take them to the dash inside the car and there'll be no problems there whatsoever. All right, so that's all the sections that break off and come down through the intake over there. Again, obviously your 1JZ-GTEs have a much shorter runner length over there, etc. So that'll all be tucked away nicely there. Right, moving along from there, it's going to be quite a long section and it's going to go from here, and this sort of ends up normally about sort of here. But coming off here, we've got two sections. One is the oil control valve. So again, everything is labeled for you guys. So that plugs directly into there. And then we have our coolant temperature, okay? Now, in this particular case, I'm just going to unplug these here quickly. Obviously, I had them on there for testing, so just give me a second. But again, the JZX100 has two sensors on it, okay? The JZS171 didn't have the two sensors on it, and that was because it used MPX to communicate to the dash. Sorry, a bit of shaky camera work there. But anyway, so this is the CLT harness that comes out there for coolant temperature. And popping out of here, we actually have two connectors. We have the black one, which is going to go into the coolant temperature, so which will be over here. And we have this one, which is for the gauge. And that one is going to use a JZX100 coolant temperature sensor. And if you want to see what one of those looks like, there you go. I've screwed it into my 1JZ-GE VVT-i head over there. There's normally like a brass blanking bolt, and then you undo that and you can put a JZX100 coolant temp sensor. So Tommy, in your case, if you don't have your original 1JZ-GE engine, you are going to then have to go and just buy yourself a JZX100 coolant temperature sensor. I can give you the part number if you want, and that's going to then screw into there. There is a place for it. You don't have to make a place or anything for it. It is already there, so you don't have to stress about that. You just need to buy the sensor, remove the blanking plug, and then screw that directly in. Okay. Then we move along to here. We have another breakout over here as well. And then that is going to come out and it's going to go to your air bypass valve. Okay. Now, again, we put this on a sub harness. And the reason being is that if you go with an aftermarket ECU, this is a perfect thing to use for a Mac boost valve. So remember, an air bypass valve is pretty much doing exactly that. Once the boost pressure gets up, obviously it uses a vacuum solenoid valve that plugs into. And so basically it is like a Mac boost valve, if you will. It obviously bypasses the air back into the intake when it reaches a certain pressure, etc. Okay. Obviously there's no MAP sensor on a JZS171. It is using a MAF. But anyway, that's the reason that's on a little sub harness there. So if you went aftermarket ECU, we could unplug this and then we could put a Mac boost valve onto there. And that's why it breaks out of the top here. So you can run it into the side of the engine bay here. Your turbo is going to be there. So you can fit your Mac boost valve in the corner over there. Okay. Also coming off there is then going to be your O2 sensor. Okay, again, we are using a standard ECU, so we do need to run an oxygen sensor. There is only one on a JZS171 because obviously you have out, turbos, single downpipe, and that's where that goes into over there. Okay, obviously these don't have a after cat Lambda sensor. They just didn't have them in the Japanese models because they never ran that sort of stuff. So again, we don't have to worry about that at all. It's just the one singular one. So these will run across the top over here, plug into the Lambda sensor and plug into the air bypass valve, which will be on the top over here. Okay. Then moving along from there, we then have another breakout, and we've only got two sections popping out of here. One is going to be your crank sensor. Again, everything is labeled for you guys, nice and simple. And then your mass airflow meter. Okay, now I have put this on a sub harness connector as well, because if you go with an aftermarket ECU, obviously you'll then be removing your MAF sensor and you'll need to be putting a MAP sensor. So what we've done here is we've made sure we've got 5-volt sensor ground, and we've also got the ability to then run a MAP sensor from here. We also have the ability to run an IAT sensor because your MAF has an IAT sensor in it as well. So again, if you're going to go with an aftermarket ECU, you could put an IAT sensor in the pipe going to the throttle body via the throttle sub harness over there. What you could also do is you could fit an IAT sensor pre-intercooler, and obviously that one would be post-intercooler. So if you wanted to log that type of data, which sometimes people do want to do, they want to see how effective their intercooler actually is at cooling the air down. You can see what the temperature going into the intercooler is, and you can see what the temperature coming out the intercooler is, and you can see if it's having a negative effect or a positive effect, and see if you need to make any improvements there. But again, I've done that. I've put it on both because obviously the MAF already has an intake air temperature that's a standard, and then obviously we can use one of the other wires for the MAF to run a MAP, and so all we've had to do is add a 5 volts in there. So that's why it's a 6-pin connector there, when the MAF is obviously only a 5-pin connector. Okay, right. So in regards to MAF sensors or mass airflow sensors, you do need to remember that on the JZS171, it's this style of mass airflow sensor. Okay, you need to be careful because the JZX100 has a completely different mass airflow sensor that actually looks like ones that come on a 1UZ non-VVT-i. So they're the big round plastic ones where basically they are the pipe. So in other words, you're just putting a pipe on one side and you're putting a pipe on the other side. Whereas the ones on the JZS171 is the same that the 3UZ use, and so on and so forth. So again, I usually have a bunch of part numbers linked down below for you guys, so you can actually get all the bits and bobs that you need, things like timing belts, etc., injector seals and all of that type of jazz. So again, I'll make sure that that is linked down at the bottom. If you're ever unsure, and I haven't done this for you, and you're unsure of what mass airflow sensor you do need, the best way to do that, guys, is to jump onto Toyo DIY, put your ECU part number in, because remember the ECU is the important part, That will then tell you what the part number is as the mass airflow sensor. Then you can Google and see exactly what it looks like, and therefore then you can make sure that you get the correct mass airflow sensor for your engine. Because the small one has different wiring from the 1UZ non-VVT-i / JZX100. It also has difference from the 2JZ-GTE VVT-i from the Aristo. They had like a bullet style one that went in there, which is the same as like a 1UZ VVT-i. So again, all of those are different, and if you wire it incorrectly, you can do things like blow up the MAF, or you can send like 12 volts directly down the intake air temperature current, which then pops that, and so you can actually do damage to the mass airflow sensor. So again, please make sure that you have it all correct and you get the correct part. So if you had to plug this into a JZX100 mass airflow sensor, it's not going to work, and you're probably going to damage that JZX100 mass airflow sensor. Oh, hang on a second, camera went funny there. Right, okay, so that's pretty much the layout. Now then, there are some things that you are probably not seeing on this harness that you would normally see on one of our JZ modular harnesses, like for an IS200. That is going to be your alternator plugs that would usually come out over here where the crank is. Now, on a JZX100, the alternator, 3-pin alternator plug, which is the same as the JZS171, same as the 2JZ-GE VVT-i. It's this one where it comes out the side like that with the 3-pin oval plug on. Now, on a JZX100, that is built into the actual engine bay harness. It's got nothing to do with the engine harness at all. Okay, so again, obviously we don't add it in because it's a plug and play setup, because there is literally no wiring for an alternator in there. We don't have the alternator sensor wire, we don't have the alternator ignition wire, we don't have the alternator light wire. But it is all built into the engine bay harness, and because he had a 1JZ-GE VVT-i, the alternator is in exactly the same place, so that should plug directly in from his engine bay harness. Okay. Also, the alternator main positive wire, the one that bolts to it over there, again, that's going to be part of the engine bay harness. It's not part of the engine harness itself. So again, that should already be there, and you can just go from there, and it should go directly to the fuse box like it does on the IS200, where it goes down over there, and you just screw it in with a 10 mil socket, obviously an M6 nut on there. Okay. And then lastly, all your grounds. So again, all the grounds that's on the 1JZ-GE VVT-i should bolt directly to the 1JZ-GTE VVT-i. It's usually down on this side on the block there, where you have a main thick cable that comes from your battery negative to there. And then usually on the cylinder head, there is an earth which makes its way to the firewall. And usually there is like it's just an earth strap. So it's not covered in PVC or insulation or anything like that. It's basically just a braid, like a thin braid, and it'll go from one of the gearbox bolts to the chassis leg. So that's kind of all the earths that I can think of that would be on a Toyota. So again, just make sure you've got those in place. So battery, body, block, that'll take care of the starter motor. Cylinder head to firewall, that's mainly like for the actual engine harness, because obviously it earths here onto the inlet manifold, so it goes from the cylinder head to the inlet manifold bolted to the cylinder head, so that works out gravy. And then lastly, they have an earth braid that comes from the gearbox over to there, and that should sort of get you right, and that'll have all the earths that you need on there. Okay. Right, so hopefully that's super helpful, obviously, for Tommy, the owner of this harness. So when he gets it on, he can obviously plug everything and he knows where everything goes. Obviously, he's going to have the fun of getting the ECU behind the center console. On a JZX100, it's never fun to do that because it is an absolute pain to get access to that area. But yeah, so hopefully that's going to be straightforward. Like I said, we might need to connect some connections up on his side from this plug over here, but that's why I made sure that we had them. I'd rather have them and not need them, and need them and not have them. So that's that. Those should plug directly into all his body plugs over there. The ECU will sit where the original one sat. That will then plug into the 2 ECU plugs that should be remaining in his vehicle. And that should be everything that he needs to go. And it should basically be a case of turn the key and start it up. And obviously now what we're going to do is I'm going to pop away. We're going to come back, and then we're going to do the testing of the engine, and as I said, in 2 pieces, one with the ignition on and one with the engine running. So it'll be a bit of time for me, second for you, but see you in a second. Right guys, so now we're back for the testing of the engine harness, and as I said, it's going to be made up of 2 sections, one with the ignition on and one with the engine actually running. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the test that we are going to carry out, and then we'll jump into the testing with the ignition on. Okay. Now, as I said, obviously this is, I'm kind of just using this to get as much of the testing as I can done, but obviously this is a plug and play into a JZX100, not an IS200. Okay. Right, so what we're looking for now is we want to test the check engine light. So we're just going to use our dash there to have the check engine light on there. So nice and simple. Charge alternator light. As I said earlier, the alternator harness is not part of the engine harness on the JZX100s. It's built into the chassis bay harness. So again, it's not something we can test on our particular case because obviously we don't wire that up. Oil pressure. So again, we're going to be looking for the oil pressure coming up on the dash, and that's being communicated via my little test device that's going on over there. So again, you saw it in the beginning, but obviously here it is. It's just that little device. It's the same one we use when we use the IS200 cluster on other harnesses. So again, that's just going to get us our oil pressure lights to appear on our dash over there. Super nice and simple. OBD2 test. So again, this is why we wanted to do this on this half cut, is because the JZX100 that came with the 1JZ-GE VVT-i actually had an OBD2 connector. So again, it was nice and easy just to connect up all the connections there, which would then give you my OBD2 connector nice and simply. And obviously that's the main reason why I wanted to do this. All right, and then fuel pump. So again, we can activate the fuel pump from the diagnostic software. So we'll be doing that as part of the ignition test. Right, the engine running test, again, starter circuit. So again, in this case, I'm going to be turning the key. Now, obviously, again, it will be exactly the same in the JZX100 because it is plug and play. So hopefully everything will be straightforward. You can plug those plugs in, turn in the car, turn the key, and the engine will turn over. Drive-by-wire test. Obviously, as you know, a JZS171 is drive-by-wire. It does have the ETCSI, same as the 2JZ-GE VVT-i. So we'll just give the engine a little bit of a rev just to make sure that that's working 100%, because obviously it doesn't, if I can turn the throttle a little bit and it revs up, we know the drive-by-wire is working, because obviously it doesn't work. That's not actually connected to the throttle blade itself. Okay, the oil control valve test. Again, we're going to be carrying out that with the GTS diagnostic service. Because it's a 6-cylinder, and there's only one set of cams, obviously when I do that, the engine will die. Don't stress, that's exactly what we want to happen, because obviously it's going to advance and retard the cam, so we're making sure that that's working 100%. Injectors and coils, what I'm going to do is I've not put all the injectors on completely, so they're just resting on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of them, bar number 4 over there, because I can't reach that one. But if I do 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, obviously 4 is working if the engine's running smooth when she's just idling away there. All right, tacho, again, I've connected the tacho up to there. Obviously, we went through the whole explanation about the dash plug and all that in the beginning. But again, yeah, so I've wired it up to there, so we should be able to get a tacho signal from there, which is great. That's what we're looking for. Coolant temp, again, as I said, because this is a JZX100 model, he's having to fit that secondary JZX100 coolant temp sensor into the JZS171. So obviously, I've taken that wire that comes out of the dash plug and I've connected it up to my MPX device. So it's going to transmit that data to the dash. We should be able to see the coolant temperature come through on the dash there, which is great. Then obviously diagnostics. So what we want to do is, because we have fitted the Atomy device, we fitted the resistors, we fitted everything. So in other words, we should have absolutely 0 codes on the ECU, and we'll show you that obviously when we run in the engine, you'll see the check engine light will go off. We'll also go into the software here and you'll see that there are no diagnostic codes on there. Okay, right. So that is all the testing that we're going to be doing. So let's jump into the testing with the ignition on. So again, as I said, it's just a simple case of turning on the key. And the first thing is the check engine light. So you can see we've got the check engine light over there on. You can see we've got the oil pressure light over there on. Now let's pop over to our GTS diagnostic software. And if I go into that, obviously I've already loaded this up because it takes quite a while to load up. It's speaking on K-line communication, but we should have data list coming through here hopefully, and we'll be able to see some live data. Okay, because obviously things like coolant temperature, intake air temperature, all of that type of jazz, that should be working absolutely fine. Right, so as I said, it is a little bit on the slow side. So what I'm going to do now is, obviously, we're just going to check, and you can actually see I've already got coolant temperature on the dash there, so that's great. Right, so we've got obviously no diagnostic codes, brilliant. We'll get to that at the very end when the engine has been running. Obviously, I've been running the engine and got its temperature, etc. already, so that's fine. Right, OBD2 test, well, that is going to be fine. You can see we are actually communicating over there. I'm just going to get into the data list now so we can actually see live data. And it should populate in a second. There you go. So we've got intake air is 19 degrees, relatively warm today. We're about 73 degrees coolant temperature. That explains why the dash is sort of all the way up there. Okay. Right. And then lastly, we're going to do the fuel pump. So again, we're going to go over to active test over here. We're going to go into fuel pump And again, if you look at the video down in the description explaining what fuel pump relay and fuel pump is, how the Toyota systems work. So again, I do advise you guys to go take a look at that fuel pump video, and you'll see exactly why I'm going on to fuel pump and not fuel pump relay to test the actual fuel pump, okay? Right, so hopefully you can see that there. So all I'm going to basically do is I'm going to keep quiet now, and hopefully... Right, hopefully you did hear that. Obviously, when we are actually running the engine, again, because I've wired it up to the IS200, it's working as though it was in a standard car. So the same signal given out by the JZS171 ECU to turn on the fuel pump is the same one that is wired up to the car. So again, the ECU is controlling the fuel pump. But again, I advise you guys to watch that video down below in the description about how the fuel pump systems work, because we get a lot of questions about guys when they put all these harnesses in, they're like, oh, my fuel pump's not priming. Well, they don't. They do not prime. They only run when they get a starter signal, or they get a starter signal, or they pick up crank rotation. That's the only two times that the ECU will output the signal to turn on the fuel pump. Okay. Right, so that's everything with the ignition on test, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna pop away, get my ear defenders and everything going. We'll pop back and we'll do the test with the engine running. So, see you in a second. Bye-bye. Right, guys, so I've got my ear defenders on and everything, so let's do the test with the engine running. So we're going to do a quick recap. Starter circuit, again, I'm just going to turn the key. I've wired it up in the IS200 to turn on the key. Obviously, the same would apply in the vehicle this harness is going into. Drive-by-wire test, just turn the throttle, make sure it revs. Oil control valve, I'll go onto the system there. I'll do the oil control valve test, but obviously the engine will die. I'll start it again and we can carry on with the rest of them. After that, it's going to be injection and coil, so I'm going to go pull up injector 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. You'll hear it misfire every time I do that, and that'll obviously tell us that every single cylinder is firing as it should do. We'll come back and we'll look at the tacho, which you will see when I start the engine anyway. And that'll be a good time to make sure you can see the check engine lights off and the oil pressure light is gone off as well. Coolant temp, well, it's already up there over there. So again, it might rise a little bit up as we go through the testing, but it's quite high at the moment. And lastly, diagnostics. I'll go through the diagnostics, show you that there's no codes and a couple of other little bits and bobs that you can do, especially with this model because it's got an OBD2 connector on there. Okay. Right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start her up. So as I said, just resting on the injector, so again they might misfire. Did that, so that's absolutely fine. Right, so starter circuit, happy with that. Drive-by-wire test, super happy with that. Oil control valve test. Okay, so we want to go into VVT-i control. You're going to see what it's going to do there. Right, so as I said, it will shut the engine down. That's exactly what we want to happen. Right, six being a bit of a pain there. Right, so that's oil control valve. Let's go over to the injectors and take them out one by one. Okay, so we'll start with injector 1. Go to injector 2. Injector 3 I can reach. I can reach as well, and injector 6, like that all in there. Okay, so I've done 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. The engine's running nice and smooth, so we obviously know number 4 is working just fine. Right, so tacho, we can see our tacho is working there. Our check engine light's gone off, our oil light has gone off, and I'm going to try and see. Right, so that is the tacho working just fine. Coolant temperature, obviously we've got it working over there, so we're super happy with that. That's all gravy. And then obviously diagnostics, we've got no check engine light on the dash there. And if I go to DTCs over here, I'm just going to kill the fuel pump quickly so we can not have to have the so we don't have to worry about that working out there. And there you go. No diagnostic codes whatsoever, absolutely zero, because again, we fitted everything that we need to make sure that the ECU is happy. Obviously, originally an auto ECU, a JZS171. We fitted that to my device, we fitted the resistors. In relation to the power steering, obviously I fitted the little IS200 map sensor. Basically any Toyota map sensor would work. The Toyota share the same plug for any type of pressure sensor. So again, as I said, if you're not fitting the power steering lines that have that particular pressure sensor, you do need to fit a map sensor or something in place of that. Otherwise you will get a code and it'll say power steering pressure switch code on there, and that'll cause the check engine light to come on. Okay. Right, so diagnostics, again, you can see we've got absolutely no codes at all. The check engine light is working exactly as it should. So if you do have a check engine light on when you install this harness, Tommy, there is actually a problem that you do need to resolve. Okay, and you need to plug in a diagnostic machine. Okay, that's going to give you the most credible information. Okay, but with the Japanese stuff, it's not strictly the case that you do have to have a diagnostic machine. There is a way of reading the codes without a diagnostic machine, okay? And that is by bridging. Now, in your case, you're gonna be bridging on your OBD2 port that's over here. Now, luckily, they are a generic wiring across every single vehicle range. That's absolutely fine. So 4 and 5 are grounds, and 13 is TC for trouble codes. So basically, you're gonna bridge 5 and 13. I think either 5 or 4 and 13, they're above each other, okay? So again, you can bridge those, and I'm gonna show you basically what happens. Now, obviously, we don't have any codes on here, unfortunately. And again, this is not applicable to this harness. I'm just doing this because I basically have this available to me. So let's just see if I can get this to work. So we want E1 over there, and we want TC over there. And what we should see, oh, sorry, cable's gone there. There you go. So you can see the check engine light is just flashing continuously, okay? That means there's absolutely no codes whatsoever, okay? If you do have a code, like let's say your mass airflow sensor wasn't working, you would get a code 24 and a 31. So it would flash 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1. And then it would start again. So in other words, it would go 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, 3, 4, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, pause. Then we'll go back to the beginning. It would go 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, 3, 4. So basically what it'll do is it'll go through all the codes, and once it gets to the end, it'll cycle back to the beginning. And then what it'll do is it'll just keep on repeating itself like that, okay? If you have no codes, it just flashes like that, okay? Again, so it's not gonna do anything at all. It's just gonna continually flash like that, all right? Now then, not only can you read diagnostic codes by bridging those two terminals, it puts it into diagnostic mode, and that has some other benefits as well for you guys, okay? So what you can do on, and it works both with the sort of Japanese and the European LS400, 1JZ VVT-i, and so on and so forth, and the 3UZ as well, actually, when you put into diagnostic mode. If you have one of our harnesses, we do show you how to do that with each and every single one. But basically what you can do is it locks the timing at 10 degrees. Okay, so you can see I've actually used correction fluid / Tipex. I've marked the 10 degrees there, and you have corresponding marks on your crank pulley there. Okay. Now, do be careful with the JZs. There's actually 2 marks on the crank pulley. So you need to make sure you've got the correct one. So obviously you want to line up your timing marks up here. So if you line that up there and line that up there, see which mark is in line with 0 and paint that with white paint, and then leave the other one. The other one is normally like a yellow color, and that's to do with when you're changing the timing belt, okay? So we do have the guides from Toyota by changing timing belts on the JZ engines. Again, if you need that, we can send that to you. But yeah, there's 2 markings on there, so do be very careful, okay? And also, as you can imagine, if it locks the timing at 10 degrees, if you leave that wire connected and you go and drive the vehicle, you're gonna have almost no power, right? Because obviously you're gonna be locked at 10 degrees. So please make sure if you are using that wire to read codes or check the timing, please make sure you remove it before when you've finished and you're gonna carry on with the rest of your day. Because obviously if you don't, you're going to end up in a scenario where the car has 0 power and you're not going to know the reason why, but obviously it's because it's locked at 10 degrees. Okay. Right, guys, so that's pretty much it. We've gone through everything. We've gone through the whole layout of the harness. We've done all the testing that we can do on this particular harness here. Now, obviously, we've got to get this off to the customer, and As I said, this was a bit of a weird one in the beginning because he kind of got this thing and all he had was the 3 cut-off plugs. He didn't actually have what I believe to be the 4th plug, which should be by the ECU connector there. So again, we fitted that dash plug on there. So again, guys, happy to work on custom stuff for you guys. Obviously, you just have to bear with us because it does require actually completely designing everything from scratch. That can take anything from 8 to 16 hours solid on the drawing program just to get everything done and dusted there. Okay, but yeah, that's basically it, guys. Super happy with everything. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to comment down below. I try and get to them as much as I can. If you want to get in contact with us, you can get in contact with us via Facebook, via the messenger service. You can find us at Phoenix Engine Management. You can also email us at info@phoenixenginemanagement.com. Okay, and again, someone will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. When you guys do send queries, what I normally do is have an auto response to show you a video that you should go and watch. It helps you guys get me all the information that we require to do a quote, so we're not having 17 or 20 messages backwards and forwards trying to find all the information. So I made that video. It's not too long, but it sort of goes through what the information you need to get us depending on what your setup is going to be. Okay, so again, guys, please watch that video. It saves a lot of time because then you guys can just send me all the correct information. Okay. All right, but that's it. Let's get this off. Let's get it to the customer so he can get it in his car and his engine running. But for everyone else, see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life. I never miss that stack, taking big swings, put your hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean.